Hello, everyone. This is Mike Koss, founder of KevAdvotech, and welcome to another video podcast edition. I'm excited to have two very special guests, Anthony Pacilio and Pam Weiss. And today our topic is creating opportunities for those who are neurodiverse. We're going to get into what that's all about, what the two of them are doing for this very deserving community to create opportunities. But first, before we get into that, Anthony and Pam. Anthony, I'll start with you. I'd like you to introduce yourself first. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure, Mike. Thanks for having me. And Pam, it's good to be with you as well. A little bit about myself. I'm the Vice President of CAI Neurodiverse Solutions, and I know we're going to get into that in a little bit. But about me, I am neurodivergent, and we're going to get into the explanation of neurodiversity and neurodivergent in a little bit. I have extreme social anxiety disorder and depression. I come from a very large family. My father had 10 brothers and sisters. My mom had 3 brothers. And back in the day, being neurodivergent probably wasn't as kind of prime as it is today, right? In the past 10 years, neurodiversity and neurodivergence has kind of come to the forefront. I think, myself, it took about 46 of my 49 years to figure out that I am neurodivergent. I always knew something was a little different and unique about myself. But I think that makes me who I am today. When you have a diverse family, and come from a big Italian family, a lot of that is suppressed, right? So I was always having to be kind of a little bit outgoing. There's a lot of people when you have a gathering. There's 100 people. If you want to stand out, you got to do something, right? And so I think what that did was it helped me mask my anxiety disorder, because I was just doing things to make sure that people didn't think that I was different, even though internally I knew something was up. I think probably into my late 30s and early 40s, my dad, who has since passed away, developed Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And I think, with that, it made me kind of understand who I am, right? So I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Awakenings with Robin Williams and Robert De Niro. They're at a facility, and the person is Robert De Niro is kind of mute, doesn't really move, and all of a sudden they provide some medication, and it kind of stimulates him, and he can talk and whatnot. And what I saw was kind of the opposite with my dad, and that's tough to take. Even I don't care if you're 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, or 70, that's
Sure.
tough to watch. And I think for me, it let me know at that moment when he developed both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and he kind of went, kind of into a mode of not really responding. I had to respond. Like, I knew that I needed to come out of whatever shell I was in and kind of break through that barrier. And I'm lucky enough, and I have a radio and television degree, so that really kind of is odd when you have social anxiety disorder to be that kind of person. But I think that allowed me to do what I'm doing today. We'll get into that in a minute or 4.
Wow, that's an incredible story, Anthony. That's incredible, especially as I'm hearing and listening to you talk about how you came to recognize and address it, right, for what it is, and embrace it, and obviously, as we get into more, how you've really overcome these challenges, I should say. So Pam, you are a second timer on this program, and I'm delighted to have you as well. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your family?
Sure. I first got involved in the neurodiversity advocacy space because we have a daughter who is on the autism spectrum, and she was diagnosed not until about the first grade. And we had the unusual challenge of saying that she got the diagnosis of autism at the same time she tested to be high IQ. So at the time, the school had been trying to push her into special education track. We knew that was never going to work for her because we knew she had the capability to excel academically. So we went through a long journey of advocacy with the school system and support, and also handling other neurological disabilities that cohabit, because oftentimes you find that there's a multitude of things that come together. Usually if you have one neurological thing going on, which, you know, you often have others. So we were dealing with different issues with a mild cerebral palsy case, a lot of muscle issues, and so we were at doctors a lot, therapists, etc. And we, you know, it was just at the time when insurance was not covering autism therapies, various things. So you were really on your own. The school system was always trying to reduce the services. So you had to really be a strong advocate. And where things really kind of fell off a cliff is when she got through college. And then there really wasn't the support to have alternative paths into employment. So that's where we really had challenges. And we worked through her eventual employment, which she's at IBM now, which I know, Kevin, is your former employer. And mostly because I did a later in life MBA program and studied social entrepreneurship, which included studying a firm that kind of helped IBM get started in their neurodiverse employment. But now I'm in the unique stage of, I work with the Orleans Group. We're a multi-state real estate law and default law, title agency, legal operations consulting, and I work with all of our Orleans Group firms, and including advocating for them to bring on board neurodiverse employees in our office space. So while we had seen that there had been a fair amount of work in the IT areas, and certainly the work that Anthony is doing is great in that space, we're focused in law. So I found that there was a lot of opportunity to bring in legal processing types of roles. And we now have a half dozen employees or so at our firms, including one that now reports to me that I took on a couple months ago. So I'm now learning to move from that parent hat to that manager hat. And it's a whole new host of both opportunities and challenges.
That's very interesting. And yeah, we want to definitely hear more about that, right, as we get into this here. So thank you, Pam. I want to take a step back for a minute and ask both of you. Anthony, I'm going to start with you. So in general terms, so I'm an old time guy, right? I'm in my 60s now, and we have a son, Kevin, who has a traumatic brain injury. He suffered that about 21 years ago, so he's 36 now. So as my wife and I advocate for him, and we're now writing blogs on KevAdvotech, and I'm meeting a number of people, I still kind of refer to this in a much broader bucket, and I call it special needs, right? So I still stick with this term special needs all the time. I'm involved with a group called Best Buddies. It's an international organization, a wonderful group. And what I've noticed in their pamphlets and how they market to their audience, they refer to the term IDD a lot, right? So intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I've kind of seen the shift go from special needs, terminology of special needs, to IDD. And I realize there's a broad spectrum of challenges, right, and disabilities. But now over the last year or two, now I notice suddenly everything I pick up, and that's how I met the both of you, right? I hear the term neurodiversity and neurodivergent. And my, bit of research, it sounds very similar. I think it's just a different way of talking about it, or referring to it. So Anthony, can you help me and help the audience here and talk about this more prominent term that we're seeing, neurodiversity? What is it and how should we be talking about it?
Yeah, neurodiversity refers to the range of differences in individual brain function and behavioral traits. It's part of, the human population's normal variation. In neurodiversity itself can encompass ADHD, autism, ADD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, anxiety disorders. So all of those kind of neurological pieces kind of fit into obviously the neurodiversity space. IDD, maybe a touch different, right? So you're talking maybe Downs, that sort of pattern there. But I think, it is a broad term. You also will now hear people who are neurodistinct. So things are creeping in. The terminology is changing. I think, a long time ago, Judy Singer kind of brought the neurodiversity word into the vernacular. Neurodivergent kind of describes that singular person. And then if you want to say neurodiverse, it's more of the group, right? So neurodivergent individual, neurodiverse, like a workforce or the talent or team. So that's kind of that's the definition, but that's how you use the terminology as well. But you will find nuances from everybody. And listen, and we went from autism to neurodiversity, right? So autism obviously was singular diagnoses. And now as we kind of build workforces, we want the term neurodiversity because we've expanded that, right? We understand that there's a big population of highly qualified individuals who are just not getting a shot to be employed. Pam knows that extremely well. So that's kind of the definition and terminology that is in use today. Hopefully that helps, Mike.
It does. So I guess is it fair to say that the term neurodiversity and neurodivergent, it's becoming more known or more an accepted term, recognized term, I should say? Is that a fair statement?
It is, and I think that's probably stemmed probably past 2 or 3 years. It's really taken flight. You'll notice a lot of firms, inclusive to ours, will be talking about, instead of autism at work, it'll be neurodiversity at work, right? So, the IBMs, the Googles, the Microsofts, the EYs, the Dells, they all have programs that are neurodiversity at work. And, obviously our company, CAI Neurodiverse Solutions, it's right in the name of it as well.
Yep. Love it. Pam, anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think part of the trend of saying neurodiverse, you both, as Anthony mentioned, it includes more than just autism diagnoses, but also it's that reminder that diversity in employment includes people in this group, because there's been a tendency to say, we've accommodated physical disabilities, people in a wheelchair, people who have deafness or vision impaired. And then we kind of tend to leave out this group where their accommodations that are needed are in a different space. They aren't like obvious physical things that you see. The other thing I would mention about the diversity and why I like that we're saying neurodiverse now is because even with the space that I lived in, which was autism and ADD, there is a plethora of differences in how it presents. So the best description that I've ever gotten is, think of your stereo equipment, and there are all these dials that go up and down, your volume, your bass, your this. And each of the types of either symptoms or characteristics, someone can have any variety of those levers. For example, our daughter has challenges with too much coming at her at once. Driving is a hurdle we haven't been able to get over, even though we've gotten over plenty of other hate. But she has coworkers that are also on the autism spectrum that do fine driving. My daughter lives independently in an apartment with some support from us, but there are others who find that that's too much of a challenge. So every different piece of whether it's the work life or the independent living, you can't make any assumptions. There's a lot of diversity there within individuals that fall in this group.
Great points, Pam. Thank you. That helps both of you. So I'm going to shift gears now, and now let's dive into some of the particulars. And Anthony, I'm going to start with you again. So to me, the exciting thing and the reason I wanted to speak with both of you is it's just so refreshing and inspiring to hear of people and companies out there that are trying to build an inclusive workforce for everyone, right? And those with neurodiversity and different types of disabilities and challenges. You know, typically we think of, you know, the minimum wage type job, right? That someone's doing, which is fine. I mean, it's not these things aren't a one size fits all, but, you know, just as in the mainstream world, right? There's a lot of underemployment going on out there, and certainly in this neurodiverse community. So Anthony, if I could start with you, tell us about what you're building, right? And
Sure.
how you got here and what you're building.
Yeah, well, so, you know, my title is Vice President of CAI Neurodiverse Solutions. Part of my job is brand and media ambassador, which I think it's funny that, you know, you give the guy who has social anxiety disorder, the podcast, the interviews, all that good stuff. So I always think that that's kind of humorous, right? But the other piece of my job is I help companies build the infrastructure to start and maintain and support neurodiversity at work programs. So my previous employer, before coming to CAI Neurodiverse Solutions, I was in the financial sector. I helped them build and sustain their autism at work program for a number of years before I came to CAI. What we are trying to do and what we are building here is ensuring what you just touched upon, that unemployment or underemployment rate of 80–85%, you know, the normal number that everybody throws in there, that goes down, right? So CAI Neurodiverse Solutions is helping firms and companies enter, Pam, the legal field. We have people who are doing back office operations for a large legal firm in the US. We're in the financial field, accounting, healthcare field, doing fraud and doing claims processing. IT, of course, we have software engineers, QA analysts. So, you know, when you were talking about just kind of one focus, and that is not the case. What we're trying to show is the depth and the breadth of being neurodivergent, right? So we all have skill sets. It's about tapping into those skill sets. So for the longest time, employers have been a bit challenged in their interviewing techniques and skill sets, right? It doesn't kind of, you know, if you're going to ask somebody where you see yourself in 5 years, I don't know where I see myself tomorrow, for crying out loud. You're going to ask somebody who's, you know, thinks a little bit differently and outside the box, where do they think they are? Well, then you're always looking for somebody who is looking you in the eyes or shaking your hand really, you know, firmly and tightly. You might not get that with somebody who is neurodivergent, right? And you might get somebody who's looking over here or looking over there, but it doesn't mean they're not paying attention. What we need to do as employers is understand what the skill sets are. Ask them about what they do. Let them show you how they can do that job. And there's a lot of different processes that go into that. But we have a lot of different mechanisms at CAI Neurodiverse Solutions, from our talent acquisition team to our service delivery team to our HR to our learning and development to myself and some others. There's 40 to 50 people that support people who are neurodivergent in getting them employment. And over the past, gosh, you know, when CAI probably started this, you know, 10 or 11 years ago, there's been so many inroads with other organizations, right? We're also teaching these companies how to fish, right? We're not going in and saying, hey, we're going to set you up and here's some folks, we have a team lead who's neurodiverse certified, which is awesome, and then go away. We're there for the long haul. We need to teach employers how to support that, whether it's with job coaches or whatnot, ERGs, BRGs, all the RGs at this point. There's a lot of different things that we need to do as a firm to make sure that, most important, that we're a person first organization and we're setting that individual up for success. We can talk about metrics back and forth, and I know you're probably going to get into that, Mike, but that's really the crux of what we do. I think we've been pretty darn successful. I think Pam realizes the benefits, not only from the employer side, but seeing that person excel, seeing that person become more independent and confident. So I'll stop there. I could talk forever.
Yeah.
Wow,
I think part of the challenge, Anthony, has been getting employers to look out in multiple areas. And so I really applaud you for doing that. So it's like we started out back when people first started hiring people with autism, it was giving them low skilled jobs. Like I can remember, it's so funny because about 8 or 10 years ago, when I was in my MBA program, I remember I'm not going to name names, but I interviewed a large employer in our town where we were living at the time. And they're like, oh yeah, we have autistic workers. And I was like, oh yeah, it's great. What are they doing? Oh, they're packing boxes in the warehouse. And I was like, is that the only thing that they can do? And literally, like on LinkedIn this past week, I saw them starting an actual initiative where people are finally going to get in the office. So it's been a slow run. People like to check a box and say, I got it in here. And then we had this push in IT, and then they're like, okay, so they can do IT, they can do cyber. Okay, they can also do more. So it's been this slow expansion into seeing that there are natural fits and lots of opportunity. And not everybody wants to be in IT. I've heard people complain and say, why are they only looking at IT jobs for me? I'm not an IT guy, So everybody has different skill sets, and they all want to find their own niche. And the interview part has been also the big part of the challenge. I think Anthony's mentioned the lack of eye contact. We overemphasize this emotional intelligence thing. And I see it often, like, make sure you're hiring emotionally intelligent people. Okay, well, you've now just knocked out the whole neurodiverse community. Thank you. Like understanding that not every job in every role at every time needs to have that trait, any more than we all need to be able to run a marathon. Okay, so, just like you don't need really great math skills, for instance, if you're in a role that's mostly you need verbal skills. So it's being fair about the application of even figuring out what's required for the role.
Yeah, that makes sense, Pam. It's funny. I think it was just last week. One of our family friends, as we get to meet more and more families down in Florida where we live part-time, right? They're all in the same situation we are, right? They have an adult son or daughter with a special need, neurodiversity. One of the kids, I call them kids, right? They're all in their 30s and 40s, and I think even a few in their 50s, but one of the kids said to me, I could tell they were stressed out. They're saying, boy, I'm going for an interview in a few days. I think it was at Home Depot or something. And they were just stressed out to the max. And I was thinking about this podcast coming up here today, right, with both of you. And I'm thinking, boy, that's, the interview process, even for kind of a lower level job even, is stressful for these kids, right? And so how do you train the employer to look past and focus on the things that are most meaningful for that job, right? I think
Right.
that's
And I think what's interesting in the field that I'm in, I'm actually the odd man out. I'm going to be, because I'm the opposite of Anthony. If you give me that personality spectrum, I'm like so far on the extroverted scale. You drop me in a room and I'm, around the room. If you stick me in a corner by myself, I might be very unhappy after a while. So on the other hand, in the legal field, you have a lot of things in real estate, where we do real estate title. You have a lot of things where you need to do a deep dive in a technical and get really into your specialty. And a lot of these roles are really, they're not well suited for me. They're better suited for an introverted person. So we have a lot of introverted people at our companies. And so for a lot of people that would be neurodiverse, that's a less stressful environment, right? Because there's a lot of other people who are going to understand that introverted personality and that need for space and that willingness to dive deep in material.
Yeah, absolutely. So Anthony, you mentioned a few minutes ago, right, about the program that you and your company have been building, right? So what I took from it immediately was it's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing, right? It needs care and feeding and constant feedback and analysis and probably adjustments along the way as well, right? Depending on what you run into along the way. So for an employer, for a company that wants to start on this path of being more inclusive and becoming more neurodiverse and bringing on staff for whatever type of job, I mean, how do you get them started? Where do you start? Can you share some of the best practices and maybe some tough lessons learned along the way? And Pam, I'll go to you afterwards for similar input, please.
Yeah. And I think with the advent, or I guess the build out of DEI and DEIA, right, accessibility at the end, and now ESG, environmental social governance, a lot of that's come to the forefront, and companies are realizing, well, that's great. We as Pam pointed out, we have physical disabilities, we have hearing impaired, sight impaired, and then all along there's been, I'll go back to kind of like a Thanksgiving thing. At the kids' table at Thanksgiving, there's neurodiversity, right? We've been hanging out over there for a little bit, and now we have a seat at the big boys' table, right? So the parents and everybody's there, and we're about to eat with everybody else. That's where it's come from. Now, what's happened though is companies they don't want to assume the risk, right? Oh, we don't know what to do in this space. Is there somebody that can help us kind of get there? Well, yeah, that's part of what we do at CAI Neurodiverse Solutions. We're taking the heavy lift off of that employer to do it, right? So we're finding the talent, right? We have different ways to do that with nonprofits and other partners throughout the United States. We have about 400, 500. We have higher education institutions that we're taking a look at their young adults who are about to graduate, and even some of their alumni. We bring those individuals in, and the best practices are, we have kind of a platform that takes a look at cognitive and behavioral attributes. We go through what we call a talent discovery session. It's kind of like an extended interview. It's our evaluation process that kind of removes the traditional barriers of interviewing, right? So it's kind of a 5-day on the job kind of training. So if we had a job that's 9 to 5, we're putting them through the paces as it would be 9 to 5, 2 breaks. All right. It's 15-minute at 10, 15-minute at 2. But what we're looking for in there is collaborative skills, individual skills. How do they like their feedback? Do they like it through via Teams or messaging? Do they like it via phone? Are they okay with video? Like, there's a lot of subtle nuances that go into that 5-day assessment. And I think at the end, and we're taking the onus of interviewing, hiring, and placing those individuals, and it takes it initially out of the hands of the employer and puts it on our side, which is great. And the individuals will still get benefits, they're getting market rate pay. But then once we discover and establish that they're going to be a good fit, and it's more of a person fitting in the job than the job fitting in the person, right? Because you want that person to be successful. We'll take that individual and make sure that that is going to be a good fit. And what we have along the way, and there's a couple things, the best practice is we're giving neurodiversity awareness training to the employer, right? So people who are working with people who are neurodivergent are getting training on what it may be like, talking about stimming and things like that. And, there's a lot of, sensory pieces and light and sound, all of that's going into it. And I think, when the neurodiversity awareness training, that's just one piece, because we've built in a neurodiverse certified team lead that is with those individuals. And typically we don't like to place one individual in one position. It's typically 3 to 5, 4 to 6, because we're trying to build that tribe. You're putting people who think differently but are like each other in the same position, doing the same job. And that team lead is there to mentor, conflict resolution. They are a subject matter expert in whatever the job is. So if you're building widgets, they're a subject matter expert in building widgets. But they're also the conduit between our associates at CAI Neurodiverse Solutions and the employer's management. So we're giving them metrics. We're giving the employer metrics. And we're also telling the employer, well, Sally likes her communication via email. Tommy likes his face-to-face. Like, those little pieces go a long way. So I know that's a long way, but those are some of the best practices to make a successful venture in the neurodiversity.
You tipped into something I was going to ask afterwards, which is, so along the way, a lot of these folks need some sort of accommodations, right? So how has that gone? I mean, are most employers, I would assume along the way they realize, oh yeah, there's going to be, in some cases, some unique accommodations that are necessary, right? And for the most part, I'm assuming it's worked out well.
Yeah, I mean, so initially, if it's an on-premise kind of job, we do an environmental survey. Not, we're not checking the soil, we're checking the lighting, the sound, where they're going to be sitting. Is it close to windows? Is it cold? Is it hot? Like, there's a lot of different things. And then we will suggest to the employer, maybe, it'd be best if we seat somebody here. For remote hybrid pieces, it's more about the technology, right? Are you going to be able to provide the laptop with all of the logistics, on the computer, right? Whatever that job may entail.
Sure.
Listen, we've had to do, some odd things, right? An accommodation could be as simple as going to Five and Below and buying a little mirror to put on the top of the computer because somebody doesn't like people walking behind them. I know quite a few. That's $5. Okay, great. And if that takes that anxiety down, 10 levels, that's awesome. We had an individual who had a red light, yellow light, green light system on her desk. So if she was green, it means you could approach her and talk to her. The anxiety is low. Yellow, she's feeling it a little bit. You might want to wait to ask your question or go up to her. And if it was red, she probably wasn't at her desk. She's out resetting herself, trying to get back into the mode. And then when she comes back in, she'll probably flip it to yellow. But everybody's like, well, that's the coolest system. But isn't that universal design? Wouldn't everybody like a red light, yellow light, green light on their desk? I mean, but those are some of the simple accommodations that go into taking out the anxiety level of folks.
We're going to come back to that one in a minute.
Okay.
You just got me thinking about something I could use in my life, my family can use today.
Awesome.
So Pam, let's turn to you and tell us a bit about your ventures here with building out the program. What have you learned, and what has your employer learned, and how has it developed?
Well, I think that there was certainly hesitation when in the getting started. There's always that fear of the unknown, I think.
There was definitely an interest in starting people out in a contract role and then transitioning to full employment, which I'm fine with, because if that gets someone off their chair. I worked in politics, meet in the middle somewhere. Okay, now they don't need to do that anymore, but they used to when I worked.
Yeah.
You know, getting people to have that, you know, lowers their risk. Try it out for a few months, have the support, and we do have an outside support. I meet every couple weeks with someone, you know, in the Autism Alliance of Michigan that helps support the venture. I think the biggest surprise was the quality of work. I think people were surprised. I got, you know, feedback from our chief litigating attorney about how good someone was in their debt collection area. And they were like, wow, they're just always on it. And you think, yeah, well, they hadn't gotten an opportunity. They've got that opportunity, and, you know, they're very motivated. You know, they're highly motivated. I think where there's been challenges that you don't always know how to approach, privacy is a huge thing. So I know, like in the program, like Anthony's going in and has a whole group, and maybe there's knowledge that they're neurodiverse. You know, one of the things we've learned working with disabilities is that that's always the employee has to be the one to disclose. Okay, so ours aren't in one team; they're spread out. You know, like if someone in debt collection, I have somebody who's working in the foreclosure area, somebody working in the IT department. I'm working with real estate title and litigation. And so they're all in different areas, and the coworkers and the people around them don't necessarily know that they're neurodiverse. We have training that we can do, but we can't just target it to the people on that person's team, because you can't come up and say, do you know your coworker is neurodiverse? So I think where I have a little bit of struggle internally is I want people to feel comfortable disclosing, but it's not my right to disclose it for them. And when we also like work with an outside client, we have someone on the call and they might seem quirky in some way, and you might want to explain, but you really can't quite, you know, do that. That to me is the biggest challenge. I think we also, on the other hand, I think some of the accommodations behind the scenes, my particular employee has transportation challenges like my daughter does. And we were told it would take a very long time for us to get the laptop, that instead of the desktop one, it works so she could work remotely, you know. So that's where I'm going to be like, oh no, it's not going to happen that way. We're not going to wait months. You know, we're getting into a Michigan winter here, and you don't want to get me talking about Michigan winters. It's not a good topic for me. So I went to the IT department. Of course, I'm going to try to jump through some hoops for her and say, look, can you just send her another desktop computer for her home? Not everybody gets that, but it makes sense in this case. It takes this person more than an hour and a half to get, you know, I bike to the bus, and then I put my bike on the bus, and then I have to take my bike off the bus. Sometimes they can't accommodate my bike on the bus, and I'm, you know, so you know, she thought it was normal to have this kind of a challenge to take an hour and a half to get to work, you know, and I'm like, no, that's not normal, and I'm not okay with that. We're going to get you remote on some things, you know, so you're not doing that every day.
Wow, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, but you don't want to let them know you're jumping over a hoop for them, because, you know, I didn't want to say I made IT give you special accommodation, because you don't want them to feel bad, because you know, our job is to make, you know, offer those accommodations and not make them feel badly that they need them.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Mind if I step in, Mike, real quick?
Go right ahead, please.
So, and to Pam's point, I think the you know, obviously it's a personal preference to disclose, right? Our program's a little bit different, obviously, knowing coming in, you're already knowing that it's a neurodiversity at work program. But what I think though, Pam, as well, is as you're going through a lot of, you know, putting people in X, Y, and Z positions, that actually is kind of educating the rest of the firm anyways, right? So people start to realize, you're like, oh, you know, Amy and Bobby are doing a bang up job. Like, you know, you start, it really starts to kind of melt into other places within companies and firms. And then the more kind of public knowledge that comes about programs like that, more areas within the firm start to say, well, geez, if you're seeing productivity like this, I could use that as well. Or I have a few positions that we could utilize in this respect. So there's a lot to be said for the non-existent marketing effort that happens sometimes. It just happens organically. And I think that's probably the best thing for a firm. And listen, if you're a 300,000 person firm, that takes a lot longer to do, unless, if you're a 500 person firm. But eventually, hopefully you will get there. I just think that everybody's recognizing the sheer talent of individuals and that untapped talent pool that's been so non-existent for so long. Just got to give people a shot. That's all.
I think some challenge down the road that we're going to see, because we're more in the stage where we're happy to get people onboarded and get them to that point where their position is permanent. But I will say that, our experience in that I've heard from other parents as well and managers is that they're not really necessarily making the market wage for that position coming in. And I think the challenge is to move them into that role and not view them as a cheap work source, right? And I'm not saying that, I view that way at all, but I'm just saying that there can be a tendency to think, oh, I can get a lesser paid skilled workforce and not, give them the wage that they've earned once they've proven that, yes, I can be a very productive part of this. So it's kind of like how it used to be with men and women that were in the same position. Women were getting paid less. I think you're going to see a lot of that right now in the neurodiverse space, where you may find your neurodiverse coworker next to you is making less and they're doing the same job. And down the road, we need to, the next step in equity is going to be making sure that they get market wages, that they have longevity, and those types of things.
Yeah, I will tell you flat out, if we are working with an employer that wants to potentially discount the disability, we will walk away. So if that software engineer is supposed to make $50 an hour and you're paying another contracting firm $50 an hour for that person, we better be getting the same pay rate piece that they're getting as well. We will absolutely, we are the advocate at that point, right? So we're not going to allow that to happen ever. So I hope that everybody hears us talking about this today, Pam, and takes it back and brings it internally and says and state to themselves that they would never do such practice, because I would just find that just detrimental to everything we're doing.
Yeah, what you both just brought up here, that is such an important point, because let's be honest, I'm sure some out there have thought about this, right? Well, maybe that's a way to show we're into the program and we're being more inclusive, but at the same time, maybe there's a way to save a buck, right? And God bless you both.
Yeah, I'll either offshore it or I'll get this team that they're just happy to have a job, so I'm going to pay them less. I'm just saying, I hear these type of things, or
it happens. It happens. So I want to get into two other areas here. So you touched upon it a little bit a few minutes ago. So if we had one of senior exec in either one of your organizations here, what would he or she say, that how would they view, how have they benefited, how would they describe the benefit to the company, right? To the company that you've worked with. Does that make sense? Am I asking that correctly?
No. I mean, ours is pretty easy. So we have quite a few clients and companies that we work with. The benefits come from a few things, right? Obviously, hiring talent that hasn't had the shot, but it's productivity. It's the attention to detail. It's the getting the job done. An example of that is we do this, what we call identity access management at certain companies, and they're provisioning software to computers. And we put a team of individuals in this particular job, and we had neurodivergent individuals, and then we had neurotypicals. And within the first 3 months, they were 150% more productive than their peers, right? So they're flying through this queue of provisioning. So management sees that and executives see that, and they're like, well, geez, maybe we need to raise the elevation. And then the neurotypicals are like, well, hey, hold on a second. I know they're doubling the productivity, but there's a healthy competition that comes into play. So, and we're finding that we had a software engineer who found a little bug in one of the financial institutions and immediately saved them $1 million because they didn't see this little algorithm that was wrong. Like, it's that different types of thinking, and it's not all about the money, right? It's also about showing that somebody can, and one of the success stories is that there was a young lady who gained confidence by having a job, and then she was living independently, and then she got her driver's license, and then her mother calls me and she's bawling, she's crying because she never thought that her daughter would be able to do all of those things. So from an executive point of view, it's great that you're getting all the productivity and the attention to detail and all that other good stuff and those metrics, but you're changing a life.
Yes.
That could be the piece of it.
Yeah, I think that knowing that, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is knowing you have people that have been highly underemployed or unemployed, and you're giving them their first chance at that full-time office employment. And what that does for somebody's self-esteem, and it is just invaluable. But I would also say, I'll just give a little personal story, which is the program that I'm building out right now has all these different technical elements. We work with several different computer systems. They have to learn a lot about the title world, real estate titles. So there's a lot of ins and outs of what counts, who's the owner, this. And, I would say that my employee has sucked that up like a sponge, like that willingness and ability to learn these technical details, but also come up, like, even in the early stages of employment, sometimes coming up with improvement ideas, so she'd look and say, there's this thing about how you set this up. I can fix that for you. I can make it better. And I'm like, go to town, so she went and synced these accounts up and did these other things I hadn't thought about doing. And so just the new ideas that will come in because somebody is looking at it a little differently. And the other thing that I would mention is loyalty. I think in this day and age, especially with the younger generations, there's that tendency to do a lot of job hopping. And my experience with this population is that if the job is working out and they're treated well, you're going to have a kind of loyalty that you may never find again.
I hadn't thought about that aspect, but Pam, it makes perfect sense. I like that.
And think about what the cost is of, because I already had an employee on my team that had to move off. It was for a good reason. He got a law school scholarship. So I'm like, you got to take that, obviously. But we had just gotten him trained and he was just starting to produce. And then now I have to start over. And you think, you're going to have that unproductive period when someone new is coming back on the team. And then everyone has to adjust to working with that new person. And, to have that not as many times around, the HR son, doing, recruitment and retention is that saves money. If you're an executive, that saves money.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna, as we start to wrap this discussion up, and I could keep going here. I mean, I'm just so fascinated and excited talking here. This is great. But I want to ask what might be a little bit of a tough question that just came to mind as we're talking. If for someone out there that's has a neurodiverse challenge, right? Someone who's neurodiverse, special needs, certain aspects, and they are pretty high functional. And are just continue to get discouraged, right? I mean, I see folks like that every day. I'm sure you do as well, right? That they're underemployed. Here we're talking about, we've spent a lot of interesting discussion here today on, about the programs and bringing these programs and people together for opportunity. But if you're that individual that knows they can do more, feels they can do more, are there avenues for them to, how would they seek opportunities and say, you know what, I think I could do more than pack a grocery bag or push a grocery cart?
Yeah, I mean, easy for me, right? this is what I do for a living, right? So I would love for them to send the resumes to CAI Neurodiverse Solutions or myself, right? We have a whole talent acquisition team that will look into what they have done. And we realize, though, that maybe they don't have a college education. We're not looking for somebody who has a 4-year degree or a master's or a PhD. You can have a high school education. You could have certifications. Send that along to myself. There's also what they have is a neurodiverse career connector. It's a website and it's a job board that has neurodiverse friendly employers. That's the whole thing. There's probably about 30 or 40 in all of the jobs that they're posting, right? So in their different jobs are IT, again, all the things that I described earlier. If they want to do something different, those are a couple avenues to explore. Those are the easy ways to do that. So yeah, please send them along our way. We have our talent acquisition team that will reach out, have a little conversation, take a look at what they have. Maybe it's a full resume, maybe it's a little resume. We don't care, but we want to see what that skill set of that person may be.
And I would add to that, Mike, that, look at your various autism and other related nonprofits. As he mentioned, Anthony, a lot of these are partnering with groups like his. And if your local nonprofit or state nonprofit is only working in what I call like the navigator space, where you're working with the, birth through high school age, then honestly, as parents, you need to advocate that they get into, the adult space as well, not just independently, but the job space. So parents continue to be advocates throughout their adult children's lives in this space, as you know, Mike. And sometimes it's just that they haven't maybe built out their organization in that area, and the parents need to be part of that driving force to make that happen. We also all have our own employers, right? So part of it is, if you have, an employer and you've been there for a while, can you be the advocate and look into, approach your HR and come with them with your ideas, and, to partner with groups like Anthony's and your local nonprofits and such to get a program going. Because it may not benefit your child, but if it benefits someone else's, I can remember just how intensely it affected me when my daughter went through the employment program for IBM. It was like a month kind of screening process at the time. And there were maybe 25 to 30 individuals that were doing it. In the end, about 6 to 8 of them got a job. So I know that for the other ones, those parents were like devastated when they went through a month and they weren't the ones selected, and I want them to have their choice too. So the need is intense, and lots of different organizations can come to the table and again, with the help of parents as advocates and parents as managers.
Good points. Great points, both of you. So I want to wrap this up, but I would like to turn this over to each of you with any final thoughts. Pam, I'll go to you first this time. Any closing comments or thoughts here?
I'm very encouraged at the progress that's being made. But I also understand that we're still very early in the process of having a lot of good integrated employment options. I just want to encourage everyone to get involved and not be afraid of not doing it perfectly. I think what stops us a lot of time is that fear, I'm not going to do it all correctly. I actually had an interesting conversation with my daughter over Thanksgiving because she was criticizing a couple folks that were talking about things in the autistic space, but she didn't like how they talked about them. And I said, well, at least they're trying. I said, it's a two-way street. We all have to, at least they're trying. And so we have to think about that when we get into employment too. Managers aren't going to get it all right the first time. We need to have some grace for both the employees and the people managing them as we go through this journey together.
Thank you. Anthony, thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think, in closing here, it's things like this podcast, getting the information out. But I think it's also imperative that we build, I shouldn't have this job in 10 years, right? It should be built into the DNA of all of these organizations. It should be just another way to get great talent into your organization. So when that happens, and I don't see that happening in the next couple of years, but when that happens, I know that we've succeeded in doing it. So that's my closing thought to you, Mike.
No, that's great, both of you. And I almost forgot before we close here. I wanted to, I cued in on your stoplight, red, green, yellow comment earlier.
I love that.
And here's my short story before we end. I had been thinking about this for the longest time. I mean, Pam, you and I talked about this in our previous interview, right? I think one of the many things that I was so fascinated and encouraged by, you shared some of your stories on how, early on you brought your daughter, you and your husband brought your daughter Ingrid out in public places, right? To acclimate and be as be part of the mainstream world, right? And we do the same. I do the same with our son, Kevin. We go out a lot. We're out in public, and there are moments, right? There are meltdowns. There are some things where we could be sitting somewhere enjoying the evening, and Yep. And we have a lot of friends, a lot of people we know in the area we live in, Florida in particular, and folks have come to know and love Kevin. But there's some times where he's not having a good hour or a good day, and they kind of walk right into a storm, right? I keep saying to myself, boy, I'd love to put a little stoplight out there and put the color on, yellow, proceed with caution, right? Come and maybe give them a little fist bump or a high five, but don't come up and give them a big hug today, because it's inviting problems, right? So I gotta think a little bit deeper on how to incorporate something like that.
My daughter used to say, you'd go give her a hug, and then she'd say, could you go away now? She would just be very blunt, like, I've had enough love now.
Worked for a minute, but that's enough, right? So
yeah, you have to respect people's boundaries.
Absolutely. Well, look, I want to thank both of you. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot personally. I hope the audience is feeling inspired, because you both inspired me, certainly here. And I am grateful for all that you're doing for this very deserving community. And let's keep in touch and hope to have you back again and learn more. This is, Pam, as you said, this is just the front end, I think, of really building this thing out right and creating a good world for all of us, right? So thank you. And thank you to our audience for joining today. And we will be back again soon.